Welcome back to another episode of the Aquademia podcast. I'm your host, Justin Grant.
And I'm Maddie Cassidy.
And today we're joined by a returning guest, James Sibley, who first appeared on the Aquademia podcast back in 2023 when he was a student engaging in aquaculture topics. Since then, James' career has evolved, now working within the aquaculture industry and producing widely followed media content and contributing to broader conversations around sustainability and seafood systems.
Yeah, and in this conversation, we're going to explore how his perspective has shifted over the past few years since we last had him on. A few of the things we're going to get into are things like how consumer perceptions of farmed seafood are formed in today's digital environment, and what he has observed over the last few years about the ways the industry communicates with the public, and what we can do better as an industry.
But before we get into this great conversation, if you want to contact the podcast for any reason, you can do so by filling out our online form located at globalseafood.org/podcast. If you want to follow us on social, you can follow us on Instagram at Seafood Alliance.
And if you enjoy this podcast episode, then be sure to leave us a rating or review on whichever podcast platform you listen to us on.
And we'll see you at the end.
Welcome to the Aquademia podcast.
Our diet is hurting the environment in myriad ways. I mean, we desperately need to eat more seafood.
This is a pioneering industry with a whole lot of people who have really good ideas and a lot of experience and are unafraid.
Aquademia is your go-to podcast for a fresh take on all things seafood.
James, welcome back to the podcast, to the Aquademia podcast. How are you doing?
Well, thank you for having me. It's great to be back, right? It's been over 3.5 years now,
Crazy.
I think, right? We were just talking before this, and this was the first podcast I ever recorded, Aquademia of February 2023. If anyone wants to go listen back to that, I don't recommend it. Listen to this one.
If you want to listen to that episode, we'll link to it in the show notes. This is kind of like part 2, but we are going to cover some different things. So it's not like listening to your episode back in 2023 is a prerequisite.
It's not required listening.
Yeah, it's not required, but we'll always take the download. So if you haven't listened to it, go ahead and do it.
Yeah, when we first spoke, I was still in university in Boston, and we're 3 years out now. A lot has changed. I've been to aquaculture all over the world. I built a business around what I do. At the time we were speaking, I just kind of did it for fun.
Yeah.
We'll get into all of that as we go.
Definitely. And it's so cool because we caught you like right as you, I don't want to say stumbled because that makes it seem accidental because it wasn't. It was very intentional, but you happened into this like major online presence and we caught you like right at the beginning of it. So I'm really excited to hear your perspective and how it's shifted now that you are even more familiar with aquaculture and with the just having an online presence as a whole.
It's a perfect start. So James, tell us a little bit more about yourself. What are you currently focused on in your work across all these things, right? Aquaculture, media, and communication.
Yeah, so I'm James Sibley. I run the SibleyAqua channels on basically all social media platforms, right? Whatever you're on, you'll find me there with some few exceptions. And I have aquaculture's largest online audience. So we speak to about 550,000 people across the board, all around the world. Those that work in aquaculture, those that buy seafood, and those that eat seafood, right? So it's the full chain there from production to import exports, stakeholders, consumers in the aquaculture space. And we exclusively work on site, filming on site with, farmers, producers, aqua tech groups, people doing innovative stuff in the field, learning how they do it, and then filming it and condensing that down into something that is engaging and digestible for anybody to watch, right? The real key to what I do is I build content, a couple minute videos here and there in a big series. So it's this month is dedicated to New Zealand. This month is dedicated to Scotland, where you can jump in and out, right? At any given day, whether you are the CEO of your own fish farm or a consumer who has never heard of aquaculture, you can come in at any point and learn something valuable about the aquaculture space. That is what we've been doing for years now. When we first spoke, I was just starting to look at what that could look like. And now here on, I've been to well over 150 sites in 14 countries, all on 5 continents. It has been an incredible journey, and there is so much to be learned out there. That's really why I do this. Selfishly, I want to learn about aquaculture. There's no better way to do it than getting out on the farms at 5 a.m. in a force 9 gale.
That is a great perspective. And I think that your videos do something that is so difficult that we run into all the time with our audiences online, is that because we're speaking to multiple audiences that are at totally different knowledge points along the journey of learning about aquaculture, it is so challenging to make content that is relevant, engaging, and informative for people that have never heard about aquaculture or people that are have been in the industry for 30 plus years. So how do you approach this content creation with keeping that in mind?
Yeah, so it was actually, I would say it was easier when I first started out because I also didn't know much, right? FCR was not ingrained in my brain, nor was, FIFO or biological FIFO or economical FIFO. I didn't have these things just ready to go. So every time they were said to me on farms, I would have to ask what that meant. And then they would get into the weeds of it. And then I could relay that later. So I've actually had to check myself in recent years. Whenever I'm making videos, whenever I'm scripting the narrative that I want, to make sure that, okay, if I'm somebody from, let's say, the Midwest who maybe hasn't seen the ocean in a decade and doesn't know that aquaculture really exists, is this going to mean anything, to somebody who has really no knowledge of seafood production? And then it also needs to be interesting for those who have grown up with it their whole lives, right? They've been on the boat since they were born. And the trick there for me is, one, making sure that I'm not using, really, really niche jargon. If I'm going to say FCR, I'm going to say feed conversion ratio and explain what that is. And that is a big hit, right? When we're talking 2-3 minutes here on any given video, that means I'm dedicating 10 or 15 seconds, right? A good chunk of time there to just explaining what that is. So oftentimes I try to avoid that entirely. If there's another quicker, better way that I can show or tell how that feed story is working, right? Ultimately, what I'm trying to say is this farm has a really low FCR, and that matters because we're producing more protein more efficiently, right? So I can work around that without saying FCR or any of that jargon I just threw in there. Sometimes I can just show it, right? Here's a big pile of feed. Here's a 5 kilo salmon. And that became that. There we go, right? 5 seconds, and then we're off to the races. So that's one way to go about it, right? And the second is bringing in the video side. There's a reason I do almost exclusively video content. And it's because more and more nowadays, I want to show and not just tell. It's how I engage with media. I'm sure it's how you do a lot of times too, right? When you walk away from a movie, you don't say, wow, that was a brilliant script. You say, that was really pretty visuals, There's a whole second story that can be told through these videos I make with the right videography. If I can set the scene correctly, right? I just wrapped up a shoot in Australia. It was one of the most diverse shoots I've ever had in my life because in 1 month I was between Tasmania, Western Australia, and Queensland.
Wow.
Right. So I had sort of the temperate south, the red sand deserts of the west, and then the tropics of the northeast. So I'm really leveraging that sort of diversity in region between those different shoots to really help tell that story, right? When I'm out in Queensland, it is not just shrimp, right? We're looking at black tiger prawns right off the Great Barrier Reef. It's very green. It's very tropical, right? When we go out west, right, I don't start at the fish farms. I start in the car because we're driving 200 kilometers down a red sand road, right? We're really trying to set the scene, find crocodiles, find kangaroos. And then we head down south and it's all about these wild seas of the Bass Strait and just out of Macquarie Harbor, just trying to build the scene around the story I want to tell. At the end of the day, I'm not just, saying look, this is interesting aquaculture. I'm trying to show off people that are doing cool things, right? Things that I genuinely believe in. So the best way for me to do that is to really kind of get embedded with them. I don't just show up for 4 hours for a shoot and then go back home. I just said I was in Australia for a month, right? I'm going out to the pubs with these guys. I'm getting up at 5 a.m. with these guys. I have, cross-country road trips with them. So I really get to learn about the ins and outs of not just how they farm and why they do it, but who they are, right? What this means to their family, their communities where they grew up.
You check every single box of why your content is so successful. You have a passion for what you're doing. You are asking the right questions before you even turn the on switch on to your cameras. Really found how to be successful in an industry that can struggle to tell certain stories.
Yeah, I appreciate that, but it's always a trial by fire. You never know. I never know, right? People ask me what the formula is. I'm like, it'd be great to know. You tell me.
But you listen when you ask those questions, right? And you're always adapting.
Always, every single video is something new, and I'm building on something I've done in the past. And then I'm throwing things out that didn't work, right? I'm not always gunning for views. I don't want to get 10 million views in every video. That's sort of the traditional approach for the content creator route, right? There's two ways to do this, right? Full time. And what that means is you got to make money, right? So I can either try and get money off my viewers, go buy my course, buy my branded water bottle, buy anything I can possibly sell, and then make views on the platforms. Because I get so much attention, I could get paid to do that, right? If I got 10 million views on Facebook, I could probably make $1,000. That's one way. That's like the traditional way. The other route, which is the far more difficult route, is to try and go through those who I'm filming with, right? And that's the approach we tend to take because I can't get 10 million views on every video. Aquaculture, while I do break the bubble, it doesn't go that far, right? I'm not getting billions and billions of hits on this stuff because it's a niche within agriculture, right? It just isn't that big. I'm hoping that we can get it there someday, but as it stands, right, it is still a niche for the average viewer. So we fund what we do with the producers we work with and the groups above them, right? So oftentimes we're going to trade organizations, governments, right? If I can remove myself from those I'm filming with to a degree, not only does it help my credibility, but it helps me build diversity into what I'm producing. Because then suddenly it's not, look at this one salmon farm that maybe is doing something unique with a feed spinner, let's say. Let's look at this entire region, because now I have the diversity to go to like 6 different farms and 6 different companies and just explore what makes them all unique. The challenges, the opportunities, why they're even there. So that's the route we tend to take nowadays.
How does your day-to-day, and I'm sure day-to-day, that's like impossible to distill because things are always in flux with travel and going to shoots and things, but what does your day-to-day look like now compared to when we last had you on when you were a student?
Well, I'm not going to class anymore.
No more homework, although maybe you're still doing work at home.
Yeah, I mean, looking back, I don't know if it's rose-colored glasses, but man, I wish I was still in university at times, but is what it is. Yeah, so it's incredibly volatile. My day-to-day is, who knows? I spend about 40 to 50% of the time on the road.
Yep.
So what I do now is no longer just me, right? I do have a team. So I have a management team that I'm essentially their client, right? They're my agents, I'm their client, and that sort of relationship. They help with a lot of back end, sort of setting up these projects, right? I can't be scheduling a month-long project across Australia while I'm also in the Falkland Islands, right? That was the situation we were in. The second is like editors and videographers. I can do things on my own, and I do, when I need to, especially like stateside projects where it's smaller. Funding in the US is difficult. Everything's fractured, and I only have like 2 days. I just wrapped up in the Chesapeake. I was there for 2.5 days, right? So I film it all myself. It doesn't mean it's just me involved though, right? Because then my editor comes in afterwards. We work through I believe it was like 400 gigabytes we got there.
Wow.
And we build out, the 3 to 4 episodes from that. So the day-to-day is really split between I'm on site, right? I'm filming. I have that sort of, I go into like action mode because those are like 16, 18-hour days, 7 days a week. And things go wrong, right? I can only fit so much in the carry-on. So then half the camera equipment ends up in the checked bags, and sometimes those don't show up.
Yeah.
Or you have this huge plan and then the weather's too rough. So we're just going to sit on the shore. There's nothing you can do about it. That's what comes with filming in this environment. It's probably one of the toughest environments out there to do content in because it's exclusively in incredibly remote areas all around the world that aren't amenable to highly sensitive camera equipment. So, all of it comes together to make it very volatile. My day-to-day is who knows, really, right? We have large plans that come with it, right? Film in this place for a week, 2 weeks, a month, come back, and that's a 45-day production with my editor, sparsed in with some conferences and the likes. And then the next big project, and then some smaller projects. I'm trying to build a little bit more stability into it, right? I had a very, very busy February through June. And then I've got not a whole lot going on until September. I'd rather have it a little more spaced out, right? I had this crazy I was in the Falklands, Australia, Norway, Italy, Portugal, Canada, here.
Oh, wow.
Back to Norway here. And it was chaos, We got it done, but
Yeah, it would be nice if
that was something like 70,000 miles in the air.
Wow. Yeah, that would be nice if it was more spread out throughout the year than just so concentrated like that.
Yeah, sometimes you're at the mercy of what other people's schedules work like, time of year, and all that stuff. Yeah, you painting that picture of all those places in a few short months is that's a lot.
But I wouldn't change it for the world.
Yeah, you're seeing some really
all.
Unique places, some places I haven't been yet that I would love to explore. So, and you're young, so you can handle it. Like when you get a little bit older, maybe the traveling gets a little bit harder. I don't know.
My back's starting to give out. I'll tell you that. I had one jump. I did Hobart to Sydney to Dallas to New York to Oslo to Florey in one go. It was 40 something hours, and then I got off that plane and I had to present like 12 hours later, and I really just didn't want to.
Oh my gosh.
I'm curious, since the last time we spoke back in 2023, how has your perspective on the seafood industry, and I know we've talked about this already a little bit, but how really has your perspective on the seafood industry and consumer perceptions really evolved?
Yeah, so when I first got into this, when we first spoke, I was still doing a lot of like wild capture content because I was a fishmonger at the time, right? So I was getting everything. And I was showing it more from like the consumer and retail side, right? I started at Whole Foods, literally like retail sales there. I moved up into sort of primary processing in Boston. And that's when we last spoke, right? So since then, I've made this jump really deep into aquaculture. And that was for a couple of reasons, right? I have a biology background. It's what I studied. It's what I have a passion for. And, while the biology behind and around wild capture fisheries is quite interesting, I find the opportunity for cultivation far more, just based on my background. I grew up as a farmer, right? That's what I was in, Western Mass. And to me, I look out at the ocean and say that's 70+% water. We're cultivating a rounding error of that. And there's how many thousands of species out there? Who knows what the potential is, right? Could we feed the world on this? I think so. We aren't yet, but we could. That's where I really fell into aquaculture. And then when I started making more and more content on it, that's when I started to pick up this disconnect between people and consumers and the general public and what aquaculture is today, by and large. I don't approve of all aquaculture. I don't think that anybody should. It's too broad of a category to say, yes, let's do this, right? There's how many tens of thousands of operators in most countries in the world. You can't just say, farmed fish is good or farmed fish is bad. But I don't think that we should be saying it's all bad because it's not, right? There's a lot going on there. So I found it really interesting that the backlash I was getting on aquaculture was coming from a broad group of people. When it was wild capture, people would say, stop draining the oceans. I get it. I get the sentiment. But with aquaculture, it was stop killing the oceans, right? You're hurting wild fisheries. And it was coming from people like recreational and commercial fishers, those with environmental backgrounds, policymakers, right? That interested me because that's not what I expected. And that felt backwards, especially in the places I was getting the most backlash from, right? Scotland, Norway, Canada, Tasmania, right? These are really, really well-regulated aquaculture sectors. So that really made me double down because I wanted to understand what happened, how we got here, and what the difference is, right? So when I first started going to fish farms and like shellfish is quite a contentious point in places like Maine. So shellfish farms in Maine, I would ask those sort of surface level questions of like, are all of your oysters eating up the clam spat, or are your fish farms sort of drowning out the bottom of the, is there a layer of organic matter below these farms? And they would just scoff at me, right? Because these are not conversations they're having because they're that disconnected, right? They're not worried about overuse of antibiotics or dying their salmon. The number one concerns for Americans with salmon, right? Those are some of the top three. And those aren't conversations being had in aquaculture of salmon because it's not really a thing. It's been regulated out or it just never existed to begin with. So that really, really drew me in, right? That disconnect is fascinating because, how do we get here and what are the impacts of that? As I go around the world now, I see more and more just how impactful that is, both on the farmers and the economies of these really, really fragile coastal communities, right? I'm often working in places like British Columbia or the Western Isles of Scotland. And without aquaculture, a lot of those places would be devastated, maybe even uninhabited. For instance, what's going on in British Columbia is they're, as I'm sure you're familiar, but for your listeners, by 2029, they have to remove all of their open net pens. And it's not a small sector, right? They have 90,000 tons of salmon a year, right? It employs well over 1,000 people. It's worth well over $1 billion. They were told to get out. And it's not verbatim, but this is what they said, is it's not based on science. It's based on social license. You lost the social media war, right? So far, they've already lost 40% of their production and 30% of their workforce on Vancouver Island, right? This is, without aquaculture, Vancouver Island has tourism in the summer, a little bit of logging, and a little bit of fishing. So it's a really precarious place for that place to be in. And it's somewhere that it will not be the last where something like this happens, right? So I've started to build a bit of an understanding of aquaculture beyond just, this is interesting seafood production. And now I really want to see these islands not just, win fights, but actually thrive, put their own stuff out there, be supported by their communities and their governments. So a lot of what I do nowadays is I'm trying to go a little bit beyond just the technicality on the farms, right? I don't want to say just, wow, isn't this an interesting approach to aquaculture? I really want to get into the nitty-gritty of it, of why it matters to this place and who these people are. It's another reason that my content seems to go a little further nowadays, is I am telling like a bit broader stories in that manner, right? You lose some people when you do that, because not everybody is, sticking around for the non-technical pieces, but you also gain another audience. And I think that that's a really important piece there, is to kind of have it be ever evolving.
That is a great segue into what I want to get into next. And I'm curious, now that you have had a lot of experience of connecting with people within the industry, and then also with your public-facing channels of interacting with everyday consumers, what do you see as the main factors that are shaping public perceptions of farmed seafood?
Yeah, it is. I may be biased here, but I don't think I am. It is 100% social media, right? This is where people get their news. They're spending more time, millennials and under, which is a good chunk of the population now, it spends more time on social media than they do on any other form of, information, TV, news, any of it, right? The majority is coming from places like Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Twitter. So those are the places where these conversations are being shaped. And when companies and farmers and producers and entire countries, right, looking at Norway here, are not talking to that global audience, that disconnect can grow and quickly, and it can get out of control. I often point to British Columbia for this, because the anti-aquaculture sentiment there, built on really nothing that has to do with facts in modern aquaculture out there, got so big and so well funded. They're bringing in people like William Shatner.
That's exactly what just came to mind when you were saying that. That video with him was so crazy.
So if anti-agriculture on a species that we know is quite efficient, and when farmed right, really can go on indefinitely. Can't say that about a lot of farming. When we see that, and then suddenly they're getting an A-list actor for multi-million-dollar deals to flip them off, literally, in that video, something went horribly wrong. And that was social media, right? There's a lot of quick money and quick views to be captured by those who, that's really all they care about. It's unfortunately how these platforms incentivize their creators, right? What I do, it took 3 years before I made a dime doing what I did, right? That's not feasible. Like, going through that is not feasible for most people, right? If you want to make money on social media, you need shock and awe. No better way to do it. And that rings true today as much as it did 5, 10, 50, 100 years ago. So what I'm really hoping to see more of is, while I'm on these platforms and I'm bringing this to as many people as I can, we need a lot more people doing this as well, especially those involved in the sector. And this is not like a faceless company page, like this is our farm. Their employees, the people, the farmers. I've seen a lot of companies where that can be difficult because of they're not allowed to be posting about what they do, or it needs to be run up through the comms chain, and it takes 2 weeks to get anything done, right? That's not how social media works. You can't do that, right? And I've had it all ways with that, right? I've worked with a lot of groups, sometimes where it takes 6 months to get a video out, and that cannot be a successful way to go about it, right? The only way to do this is to be quick and fast and bold, right? Sometimes I light fires. sometimes intentionally, sometimes not, but it happens. And I wouldn't change that, right?
Yeah, I think you're right that what you said about the platforms incentivizing that, like just the type of content that makes you feel any sort of emotion. Usually the emotions that resonate the most with people are negative ones. So seeing something that's anti anything, I feel like it's a lot easier to get on board with that as an everyday consumer than it is to see like feel good content.
Yeah. And to me, the light at the end of the tunnel of that, right? I don't want to say, oh, look at all these problems, right? I think that fascination and intrigue is just as powerful as shock and awe and negativity. I always look to the works of David Attenborough and those crews. They can make me stick around for half an hour on a video about some bird in some island I'll never see, right? Because it's a beautiful story about something that I had no idea existed. And now suddenly I'm obsessed with it. And that is something I try to do with what I put out there, right? It really comes down to, are you passionate about it? And does that come across? People will sort of latch on to enthusiasm, no matter what the subject, right? As long as you are like authentic and true with it, which is, that's a big piece of what I do. I only go on to farms. I only work with countries, producers, regions, et cetera, that I really honestly believe in. I would do it for free if I could. Those are the groups that I want to work with. The farmers doing stuff that is really going to push the whole sector forward. Sometimes there's risk in it, and sometimes it doesn't work. I've worked with groups that no longer exist because they're trying something new. But to me, that's what matters most is, get out there and try it and then show people what you're doing.
This episode is sponsored by WildTech DNA and their newly launched Aurea pathogen detection kit, changing how aquaculture will test for disease. Their vision is bold, putting pathogen detection directly into farmers' hands wherever they farm. Ultra fast, easy to use, affordable. So no lab or expertise required, no delay, no guesswork. A highly accurate result in under 15 minutes. Whether in the freezing waters of the North Atlantic or the warm waters of South and Southeast Asia, Aurea works anywhere. Built for salmon and shrimp pathogens today, it can be quickly adapted for any species. Aurea is a finalist for the Innovation Award at the 2026 GSA Responsible Seafood Summit, Bangkok. Find them there or contact them at www.wildtechdna.com for more information. I was thinking as you were answering that last question, the way that social media has changed for me is how much AI has infiltrated these posts to the point where it's really easy to trick people into feeling something that was fabricated and wasn't even real. And I wonder if when people start to catch on to that's AI and they see AI as being a fake way to invoke an emotion that wasn't there, that people may get more, they'll start believing less in things that seem either too good or too bad. And if that would help the industry or hurt it. I guess that's not really a question. It's just it's just a perception that I've had. But I know AI now is something that we're all going to have to deal with in this marketing space.
Yeah, there's no way around it. And it is here.
Yep.
Right. It has been here for some time. I saw a post recently, or I think it was an article. I couldn't tell you what journal, but 40% of posts on LinkedIn are now AI generated.
Oh, wow.
Right. And I'm like, that makes sense because I can barely use LinkedIn anymore because it's all just slop. I have an opinion on AI generated content, and it's that it's all terrible. Mm-hmm. I don't care if it is technically good writing or that it is an interesting story. You didn't write it, you stole it, right? From people like me. Who put 3 years into this without getting paid to do it, to try and build a future on it. I see my face being AI generated in articles and stuff. And I reach out and say, why? Right. Take it down and why? You could have just asked me for a headshot. I would have given it to you for free. But instead you put me in an algorithm and now it's there forever. There's no escaping it. It's going to happen to everyone. And, I watch cautiously. I know how to use all this stuff. And I do use AI, right? We all do. I don't use it for any of my creative work. It helps me code my website. If you go on my website, there's these little fish that will kind of scatter as the mouse moves around. And I just thought that was fun. And the mathematics behind that were a little bit out of my realm as a biologist. So like, that's where I think it's useful. It's like, I can do that in 30 minutes instead of spending 6 months learning advanced, I don't even know what it would be, algebra or something. But when it comes to the creatives, right? Writing, video, audio, photos, the works, right? It really is incredibly detrimental. And in both ways, I have people send me AI stuff about seafood all the time, where it's like somebody's making a post about sea lice, and then it's literally like large deer ticks AI'd onto a piece of like a salmon fillet. Yeah. And they're like, is this real? I can't believe I have to say that this isn't, right? But it's getting better and better. And that's a problem. Yep. It tricks my parents all the time. Most of what they send me is Facebook Reels that are AI generated. I don't even open them anymore. It's going to be a real problem for seafood here, not just because of the detrimental posts about it, but when it's used wrong by the sector. Anytime an AI generated ad or whatever pops up on my LinkedIn or Instagram or whatever by a company, I'm immediately turned off of it, right? Like that is, and there's a lot of studies that back this up, like Gen Z and under. It's almost unanimous how much they despise AI generated creative content. So, to the marketers out there in seafood right now, like even if you're working on a tiny, tiny budget, you can do a lot as long as you get out there, film, put something together and get it out to the world, right? Most people do not post any videos publicly. It doesn't have to be good. It just has to be interesting. You have to be passionate about it. Like, you just be proud of what you're doing. I was, when I was making those voiced over videos of tuna that I'd voice in the car, and there was, trucks beeping up in the background, and I'd forget to edit out an entire sentence I messed up and restarted. I still put it out there. That's kind of my view with this stuff right now. It's, as you can tell, I don't like AI generated creative content. But it's here to stay. So we kind of have to learn how to work with it. It's something I definitely have to do. I'm never going to use it, like in the world we live in right now with what AI video and footage is. I'm never going to use it in my content. It goes against the very fiber of my purpose here, right? I want to educate and intrigue people. And if I start cutting corners just to get more videos out there, then I'm done, right?
Right, because what's the point at that point?
Yeah, because then the point is not intriguing and fascinating and educating.
It's to make content.
Views.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
So with all of this in mind and talking about how you've been inspired by David Attenborough, and I love that perspective, what type of content that you create, what sort of through lines do you see in what resonates the most with people and what gains the most traction with people?
Yeah, if I can say X is the most interesting, the first, the most unique, the most productive in the world, if that's how I can start a video, I can really capture people. It has to be true though. So, and this can go both ways. I've worked with the world's largest salmon farmer and the world's smallest marine salmon farmer, both of which I've used to my advantage when I'm making videos about it.
Both are interesting.
Right? Exactly. It's like, okay, how are you doing 600,000-700,000 tons? How are you only doing 1,500? Pieces like that. I really, really leverage whenever I can the uniqueness of a farm, right? Having visited well over 150 sites now, I'm starting to see what is common at these places, like beyond just what I read about online about it. What I see there, right? I just wrapped up in California. It was the first trout farm I'd ever seen that only feeds vegetarian diets. And their omega-3 to omega-6 ratio is the highest I've ever seen in any finfish wild or farmed. Pretty cool, right? Like that's a great way to start a deep dive into why they do it and how, because everyone knows what omega-3s are, even if they don't know what they do. And they know that they're good. So leading in with that, and then you're feeding a carnivorous fish nothing but vegetarian feed, how and why? Let's get into it. I really just try to hook people with the uniquenesses that I see on every farm site. Everywhere has it. There is no farm they're all like snowflakes. Everything's different. You just have to, if you spend enough time there, you'll start to see what stands out.
I'm curious, and I know you've touched again on a lot of these digital aspects of your job, but specifically, like, what type of communication approaches have you seen that really help create more productive dialogue and trust between, say, like seafood producers and the public?
Yeah, that's a great question, right? And one of the difficulties there is it's very rare for the primary producer to be connected with their consumer. It's going through importers, distributors, processors, right? Usually at a minimum, there's a couple middlemen. I've seen up to like 6, which can end up being a reason that your salmon is $50 a pound, pieces like that. But it also disconnects the consumer from the farm.
Yeah.
The people who made it, the people who put years into that animal. If I go to my Trader Joe's around the corner, I'll be, I think most of their salmon's from Norway, and that's about all they're going to put on it. That's all the information I get. So when I can help a primary producer build a story around what they do that their buyers latch onto, just the same as consumers, the rest of us, when we go buy seafood, sometimes we're buying a story. Sometimes we're buying because it's cheap, but when we're really drawn in, we'll spend an extra buck because it's fascinating. I do that with New Zealand king salmon. They got me through and through. When I can build a story with the producers, the farmers, that gets passed on through their buyers and starts to trickle its way down out from there to their consumers and the retailers they sell to, that is like the best case scenario for those farmers, because then the uniquenesses they hold and the story behind what they're doing, the care around their farming, actually makes its way to the chefs. Ultimately, building a menu at a restaurant is the best way to get more than a sentence into any seafood sale, and to make people care about a little bit more than price. I have many, many thousands of chefs that follow what I do, and many dozens of American producers as well. And it's a really brilliant way to get them all around the same table, right? That's why I try and make my content approachable for really anybody. I say anybody, but it isn't. You can't. There's no such thing as content that is literally for everybody. But I try and hit those groups. If you have an interest in seafood in some way, or you're a farmer, or you sell seafood, or your dad sells seafood, then I want you to, turn an eye to it, right? If I get you in the first 3 seconds of my video because I said this is the most, or this is the smallest salmon farm in the world, and we are in an old volcanic caldera in New Zealand, I hope that I interested you enough there to stick around for a couple minutes, learn about it, and maybe pass it on if you're in that position.
I think that notion of building trust is paramount when talking about social media, especially when you said earlier, James, that probably the main factor of what is influencing public perception is social media. I think that leaves us with a huge opportunity for the seafood industry and how we can utilize this tool to help people understand where we're coming from. So looking forward, what sort of opportunities do you see for the seafood industry to help build more constructive and educational conversations with consumers?
Yeah, it's a big question because there's such a big opportunity here, right? Whenever I'm giving conference talks, it's almost always about what I do, how I do it, and why we need more people that do this. Because there's, I don't know, I could rattle off the 3 or 4 people that do what I do. That's not enough. I think there's FAO said, I believe it's 20 million people are directly involved in seafood production around the world, aquaculture production around the world. That's a lot for 3 to 4 people to try and cover that way.
That is crazy when you put it like that. Yeah.
Right. Obviously there's nuance to all of it, right? But when I left Scotland, for instance, I did a year-long stint in Scotland. I moved to the Scottish Highlands, and I embedded myself in their production scene for, it was like the latter half of 2024, coming in through 2025. When I left, I had built over 50 million views on Scottish salmon in 1 year. It was the most visible aquaculture sector in the world for my time there. And then I picked up and left. Some companies, for instance, Loch Duart, who I actually never filmed with when I was there, I didn't have the time. They hired an internal content creator. His full-time role, his name is Robert, is to produce content publicly, both for Loch Duart's pages and for his own, right? To build a persona around what they do. We're farmers, but we're on the water. Here's what that means. Here's our day-to-day. Here's interesting pieces throughout. I thought that was brilliant. Salmon Scotland, the trade organization, did the same thing. And then, of course, others didn't. I think that doing something like that, committing resources to social media content creation, is paramount nowadays. You can't not do it. It's not just a part of marketing. It honestly should be the first step, right? Buckingham Palace just hired a content creator to basically follow King Charles.
Wow.
Right? So this stuff is embedded and it's everywhere now. So if you're not there, somebody else will be. And it's not your message that's going to get out there. That can be a good thing at times. It can also be a very bad thing for those farmers who are trying to do things right, who just get wrapped up in these controversies and stories of those that are not. So if we can get more folks, if you're doing innovative things, right? If you're pushing the boundaries, if you love what you do, right? As a farmer, get out there, film some stuff, put it out there and do it consistently. That's the big thing, right? I see I help a lot of like small creators in the aquaculture space all around the world that are interested in this and want to get into it. And the biggest hurdle is consistency, right? They put out a couple of videos, maybe they don't get the viewership they were hoping for, and then they're disenfranchised because they put a lot of time and effort into that, all their free time, right? This stuff, as I'm sure you guys are well familiar, it takes a lot of time and it only gets worse.
Yeah.
Right? My reels are like, I don't know, on a good day, I can get 1 2-minute reel done in like 8 to 10 hours.
Yeah, that's really good, actually, I would say, for the kind of content that you create.
That's if I'm like, no emails, nobody's calling me,
Yeah.
right? Straight to the laptop and then off at like 5, 6 p.m. That doesn't happen. But, it's a lot of time to commit to this stuff and it's real work. But the benefits only grow. When this stuff first started out, it was, that's a fun picture of a fish, on Instagram in 2011. And now content creation is a $30 billion a year industry just in the United States. Food is $5 billion in that. Seafood and aquaculture within, there's no data on. It's just too niche. Goldman Sachs doesn't care. And that's where I get all my stats on this stuff. So who knows? I know aquaculture is quite low and there's a high ceiling for it because it's so misunderstood, because there's not a lot of information out there. I feel like my channels and what I do proves that there's interest in it, right? I've racked up over 300 million views on aquaculture. And that's just me, right? I'm only making things in English. That's not even like a top 3 language in the world, especially in regions where this stuff is produced. You got to play to like the global audience, especially as a global producer. I'm talking countries here, right? People love a narrative that is based in place. I've started to dabble in longer form content recently. For instance, I just put out a 20 some odd minute documentary, a film in Italy, looking at an Italian trout farm that used to feed the Medici family.
Whoa.
Which is fascinating, right? Up in Tuscany. And we brought the crew. As I said, like I can film things on my own. I prefer not to. So we can bring up to 5 people, to make these projects really sing. And that's what we did there. So we built a longer story around a Tuscan trout farm that dates back almost 100 years, around food and Italy and the history of this region that we're in there, Bibbiena. And it's not just me on the camera either, right? We have a co-star there, we have the farms, and we're trying to build almost like a series there. So that's episode 1. We have another one coming out soon in Greece. We went to the island of Kefalonia in the Ionian Islands. That one's going to be something else. That was a fun one to film. The footage looks incredible. It's hard to do Greece wrong, right? And then we're going to jump up to Ireland and do a long piece there because they are the only country that has an organic certification requirement on their salmon, and that is interesting to us, right? That's why, how is it working, and what's ahead, because they also have a lot of issues with social license, but they're also certified by like most global organic certification schemes. So it's a really interesting disconnect. How did we get here? Let's look at these farms, in depth. So that longer form stuff, it's not helping my attempt at reducing volatility, I will say, because a lot more goes into that. It does not scale linearly. A 20-minute video does not take 80 hours. Right. It takes, 800. Get all this. But what's really good about it, and the method that I use now on all my shoots, is I film for both almost at all times. I'm using much better camera equipment, full frame cameras, where I can shoot for socials and for long form YouTube stuff that can be put up on a movie theater screen if you want. I'm shooting for all that at the same time. It adds a little bit of complexity to the shoot, nothing we can't handle, and it gives us a lot more freedom to work with this stuff after. I always say to anybody who's going to go film aquaculture, just don't turn the camera off, right? Just run it the whole time, capture any and everything, and then you can build the story later. Once you've learned and understand how these farms work, that's when you can build a linear narrative. But while you're there, let them run the tours that they're used to, right? These farmers are used to bringing people out. They might not be used to having it be filmed the whole time. So, you do your part, the filming, and let them tell you about what they do. And then afterwards, you can actually build a story, right? When I filmed New Zealand, I don't know if you saw that, but it was 9 episodes around the South Island. That was not a linear shoot in any way, shape, or form, right? I didn't start in Nelson and then drive south and then work my way back up north. No, we bounced around. I did 2 full laps of the islands, kind of zigzagging between species. And, I'd start at one producer's hatchery, go to another one's sea farm, go back to the first one's sea farm, and then wrap up in research or something, right? But after the fact, we made it into a road trip. You can kind of build the story around the footage as long as you have it.
I'd say if any of our listeners who are interested in kind of the line of work that you're doing and trying to tell a story, which is needed in the industry for sure, the advice you gave of just keep rolling is so incredibly important. And I can't tell you how many times I have used footage that ended up just matching what I was trying to create perfectly from just me having the camera on and just saying, well, you know what, I'm just going to go over here and I'm going to shoot this. Just, it wasn't scripted. And then you go, that was it. I'm so glad that I did that.
Absolutely. Yep. It's, one of the tricks I employ nowadays is when I do like an interview with somebody, let's say like I just wrapped one up in Australia where a biologist sort of heads up their genetic selection program. And she did fantastic on the interview, very, very technical. And then I kept the camera rolling, pointed it at the floor, and then we just started, having a conversation. And half of the audio I used in the episode for that is from that after the camera is off your face and you kind of become more conversational.
Yeah.
And that happens a lot.
That is so interesting. So often when Justin and I will wrap a podcast episode, we'll just continue the conversation naturally a little bit with our guest. And I would say maybe like 50% of the time they will say something after we've stopped recording and we're like, why weren't we recording that? Right. Because at that point, it's like that's when they're more comfortable and you've built a little bit of rapport with them. So that is such a crucial learning that you're implementing, just like keeping it going.
It's one of those things. It's, as much as I want to complicate a shoot by having more and more drones and cameras and underwater stuff and more people there's a lot to be said for keeping it lean and mean, right? That's why I do both, right? We can have the full crew and make it this insane, complicated thing that runs us 10 grand a day. Or I can just show up with whatever I can fit in my carry-on and we can do this sort of bootstrapped because there's an authenticity to that people really appreciate. And with tech as it is nowadays, I can fit a drone, an action cam, and my main Sony camera and all the batteries I need, it can go in my overhead. Sometimes that's the right way to go about it, just to get that authenticity.
Right. So I'm going to ask a pretty big question as we're getting close to closing out here, but where do you think the biggest opportunities are for improving communication right now?
Oh, that's a big question.
Yeah.
You undersold that. Yeah.
I'm good at some things.
To me personally, I never feel like I'm doing the farms justice, especially when they are really some of the most innovative, the ones pushing the boundaries. And I would say half the time the buck stops with me. I roll out my series. I bring a lot of attention really quickly. And oftentimes those farms don't continue it. It's costly and it's risky. I get it. But if I roll out, my New Zealand series has like 11 million views on it to date, but not much was done after that. If I can do the same thing in Australia, but they build on that, maintain it. I put all my stuff out collaboratively with those farmers, right? They have an audience that's listening. So talk to them. That is a huge opportunity, and it's basically handed to them on a silver platter. And again, I would say 50% of the groups I work with don't do that in any way. That is where real impact can be had, because if now you have the audience, you have people that care. And if you continue to produce interesting content that they see all the time and you do it for years, then they trust you. That's what's so cool with social media is you can build brand recognition for a B2B business, right? In a way that you could never do before. A lot of times I get asked like why it even matters. Why can't a farm just like operate in the shadows and then sell their fish on the commodities market and that's it? No one knows they exist. You could do that in the 80s and 90s. And because of that, we are where we are today with social licensing problems and misinformation and just the general lack of knowledge when it comes to aquaculture. Sort of flipping that script a bit, just getting more pieces out there, getting people behind it too. I'm a huge proponent of video content because while it takes a lot more work sometimes, people can learn a lot more from it, in my opinion, right? Sometimes I'll read things, but I much prefer to listen, and as far as the opportunity goes for the seafood sector, because there's so few people doing this, the barrier to entry is pretty low. If you make something interesting, it doesn't have to be well recorded or well voiced, or you don't need all this camera stuff that I have. If you are consistent with it and it's interesting and no one else is doing it, you can carve out a bubble for yourself pretty quickly. It's an opportunity that not a lot of people have jumped at, and there's reasons to that, right? I get calls from other content creators about the struggles they have working with aquaculture. But nonetheless, that is a great opportunity for people who are willing to put in the work and can put up with the backlash and can deal with the harsh environments. If you can do all of that, right, this is a great time to enter this space. With the way that aquaculture changes as quickly as it does, there's only going to be more opportunities for work within it. A lot of the places I film, I wrapped up in Scotland in 2025 and I haven't been back in 9 months, and there's already like a million things that I want to do there again.
While you have our global listeners' ears, is there anything else that you want to get out there while you have the microphone?
Yeah. If you have any interest in making these sorts of, videos in seafood in any way, shape, or form, I started out as a fishmonger. Yeah. So I would, with my right hand, or I would just kind of prop my phone up in like the tiles of the ceiling, and then I would fill it, down below. And then I would talk about whatever that fish was. That was how I started. And I did that for about a year. And I got a really big audience really quickly. I didn't know what to do with it for a long time, which is why it took, a couple of years there for me to figure out where to go with it. But there's a lot of resources around nowadays to figure that out. Reach out to me, ask me questions about it. I'm always happy to help. I help a lot of people with this stuff that are, interested or want to get started. It's not for everyone, but if you have the passion and you're willing to put your face behind it, right? Sky's the limit with this stuff. Because again, there's so many millions of people involved in this space, and you can help every single one of them. And that feels amazing. That's selfishly, that's one of the biggest reasons I do this is, I get to help these farmers that I meet and befriend, and, we text all the time. Most of my inner circle is fish farmers who are 10,000 miles away. And it's just a great place to be involved in like that. I didn't have a fishing background. I didn't work in aquaculture prior to this in that sense. Yep. So I think that only goes to show that really anybody can start out doing this. Mm-hmm. You don't have to have that background like that. You can just give it a shot.
Where can listeners find your content? And I want to link to all this stuff in the show notes. And if they have any questions for you, what is the best way that how can they find you and reach out to you?
Of course. Yeah. So my handle's SibleyAqua. It's just my last name with aqua. I was very creative with that. And, places like TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, You'll find me there, right? And reach out anywhere but TikTok, and I will get back to you in 24 hours. If LinkedIn's your thing, I'm there. If you like longer form stuff, YouTube is the place to go. We're starting to roll out, as I said, the Italian, the Greek, I have an Australian one too, actually. Oh, and a Falklands one. I got a lot of stuff coming on over there. Check that out. SibleyAqua, my name, James Sibley. You'll find me on all major platforms.
Perfect. And I'll make sure to link to all of those in the show notes. So whenever our listeners want an easy access point to all of those, just check those show notes out. Well, James, again, just thank you so much for taking the time. You are a very well-traveled, very busy person that is doing amazing work in the aquaculture space. So we commend you on that. But thank you again for taking the time to sit down and chat with Maddie and I.
Thank you both for hosting me. I always love to talk about fish. I do it for a living. I do it in my free time. I'm never not talking fish. So if I get a chance to help anybody in this space understand what I do better and maybe do it themselves, then that's a win. So yeah, to anyone listening, seriously, reach out. And, I hope you enjoyed the episode.
Folks, that was our conversation with returning guest James Sibley. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something. As a reminder, you can contact the podcast by filling out our online form located at globalseafood.org/podcast. If you want to follow us on social, we are on Instagram @Seafood Alliance.
And the best way that you can show your support for the show is by giving us a follow on whichever podcast platform you listen to us on.
We'll see you at the next episode.
Bye.
Ciao.